All right, I've finally joined with the appropriate permissions now and recording. Sorry about that delay, guys. The technical parts. Just fun with Zoom. All right. Again, sorry for the disruption. So the idea is we're going to do a round robin of first impressions and questions that you might want raised, and then go on to exposition of the reading. Dan, do you want to start us off?
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
So first I did the readings, but I did it like 2 months ago. I was looking briefly now to remind myself what was there. But I think it's so a few things that kind of stay with me is like, as you mentioned, like the time space is quite it's like Heidegger's kind of going very deep into that, and it's for example, it's in the Dasein, the Da, like it goes there, and how deep is that, and how primitive, I should say, not deep. And it's kind of like I see, like I struggle, for me personally, it was kind of struggle to understand the Da in Dasein for a long time, and it's still kind of is very difficult. And this kind of time space goes even deeper. It's kind of like it's that thing where Da in Dasein happen, and then all these conceptions of time and space that we kind of are stuck these days with, and try to not to reject, but to go even more primitive on those and see what's there behind those things. And it's kind of like it's core to Heidegger's, I think, this to understand this time space stuff. And then with sheltering is kind of like, we know, like these days we have this notion of truth that is transparent, it's obvious, it's accessible to everyone. It's true that once we show it, is there and it stays there forever, and we have this sheltering and concealing and unconcealing and so on. And I think that's also, it's a very, very important concept there in Heidegger, and it's here. We have this kind of like this, almost like a cult, like the future ones, the few ones that understand, and they started this thing, and they need to stay there restrained and keep silence and be the solitary ones that meet in solitude and so on. And it's Heidegger kind of starting a new religion, and it's pointing to these people. Of course, he's one, and I don't know, we are probably some of them doing this kind of thing in open now. And then the God, the last God, that's also like kind of always struggle with to understand that, we live this in like, we either believe in some God or we don't believe in any gods. And to get Heidegger on this concept of last God, and especially that motto that, especially not the Christian one, we need to stay away from kind of go back in touch, understand, like accept the God somehow, but not the Christian one. And all this thing, I think it's quite important and fundamental at this point in the book. And I will have more questions as I read, and I will go there, get more concrete. But that's it for me.
It's a good overview. One of the points I want to underline that you raised is this way in which the sheltering business has to do with the, if I'm going to put it this way, the publicness of truth, or whether or not truth is something which is open, obvious, and transmissible. There needs to be some way in which truth is something shareable. It's part of its essence in a way, because it's about an uncoveredness. But on the other hand, there's aspects of it that have to retain their element of there's still something concealed, something like that. And this is related to there are lots of criticisms of in Heidegger of the notion that truth is like in the statements as opposed to in the mind that understands the statements, or not even the mind that understands the statement, but between them, something like that. The proposition that the truth is in the statements and is therefore something external, objective, verifiable, very far from what he's saying. So in what sense this sheltering happens as something like truth being written into beings somehow in a way that can be read off again, but not read off again so openly that the concealment aspect of being is lost. We definitely have to talk about that. But I think you're right to highlight that the issue in that, the fundamental issue in the section on sheltering is, kind of this way, the publicity of truth, something like that, the publicness of truth. All right, and then as for last God, it's notoriously one of the hardest concepts in Heidegger, so we will definitely spend some time on that. I agree with you. The time space is meant to be a deep exploration of part of the structure of the Da. And what's noteworthy here is that it's a very different treatment than you get in the later parts of Being in Time or in the temporality sections of Basic Problems of Phenomenology. It's not distinguishing these multiple levels of time and the unity of the ecstasies and so forth. There is something like that still going on. It's a structure like it still going on, but he's getting much less detailed about the specific temporal aspects of that structure. And space is at least, well, space is an almost equal partner to time here, whereas this focus was much more on time in the previous treatments of this element of Da. But we are exploring something here about what makes the Da, what makes the there in there being there. And those are just, others may raise their own questions about that issue. We'll try to get to it in the exposition. Pete?
So I'm good with October 27th.
Okay.
And I read it in preparation for the previously scheduled meeting. So I went back over the last few days. And with the future ones and Last God, I sort of had the same problem I had in section 1, where they came up, where he's, just saying there's nothing we can do except not try to think through it willfully. That'll just make it even take us further away from what's required, but it's something to come, and we sort of have to wait for it to come. So they're kind of my least favorite parts of this book. The time-space, that I always find the most affinity with. I can't but keep reading it in different ontic senses, and so yesterday I was rereading it and I was thinking the Wheeler-DeWitt equation and that the abyssal ground is the Hamiltonian. But yeah, that centering, everything on the event, very partial to. Well, one sense I'm getting from The Last God is that, unlike in Being in Time, where he says, we can be fallen or with the they, inauthentic, but we can also have access to being itself at certain times. Now he seems to have shifted his position and saying, no, we really can't have access to being until the Last God or the future ones hint to us what being really is all about. So that's my impressions.
Okay. On the issue of the can't do anything but wait, I draw your attention to the very last section of Last God and page 330, where he describes what he calls the most insidious form of the most profound godlessness, which was the idea that the human being has nothing to do with but wait. He's very down on that notion, rather than thumbs up to that notion. But he's contrasting it with something like willingly taking a leap, or being dislodged in a Dasein or something like that. We'll get to that when we talk about his. I agree that, as Dan puts it in the previous section, he's explaining the foundation of the cult of being, so to speak. But the notion that because of anything like a uncertainty or inaccessibility of the intimations or hints of being, that all that the future ones do is wait in silence for revelation to come to them passively, is whatever it may be in later Heidegger, certainly not here, right? This is much more active than that, and it has a program of ongoing investigation in which the whole thing is placed, and there's even clues along the way, and we'll get to all that. But it's not passive, is what I try to say. We can certainly talk about some of the ways in which some of the time-space things may differ from the way that physics likes to think about these things, but the focus is definitely on the event, as you put it. I would go further. Time-space is trying to say something about the Da, which is a grounding in something like a between that includes the subjective pole, if we want to put it that way, in terms of the previous philosophy, right? It's not a abstract structure that is independent of consciousness, Dasein, thinking, anything like that. The event is meant to be something about what actuality is like, if I can put it that way. And one of the things that actuality is like is that it's not a class. It's in each case unique, right? And space and time are even the principles of individuation of that uniqueness, so to speak, to put it in scholastic terms. So that actuality is a spatially and temporally differentiated thing. It's not simply a thing, but you get me. But anyway, we'll talk about that. The time-space notion having this consciousness pole, if I can put it that way. There may be physicists who want to have a consciousness pole too, or at least an observer pole, but that's a different story. Only some of the physicists want that. Ella, first reactions. Did you manage to do the reading? Familiar with the format? Any other sorts of questions?
Yes, first meeting. So I'm trying to catch up with all of the quality videotapes.
Thank
on
you.
YouTube. Great discussions, top notch. I ordered the book. I'm waiting for it. Should arrive any day. I'm probably going to continue to listen to the videotapes. There are a few I didn't get to. My previous history is I've read the Kant's 3 critiques, some Kierkegaard, Plato, some of Alfred North Whitehead, and then I got interested from him in the pre-Socratics. And it's interesting, you were just mentioning this subjective pole. Whitehead references the subjective pole and the mental pole, but I don't have enough information to sort of discuss that at this point on Heidegger. Basically, that's it. I was looking for the being in time, which I have read previously years ago, but I couldn't find the videos on YouTube somehow.
Unfortunately, we did Being in Time before we started recording them, because we only started recording them after COVID happened and we were forced to move online. So when we did Being in Time together, which we did for over a year, we were doing it in coffee shops and there was no recording. So there are no tapes of it, alas. So our taping started in the middle of our reading of volumes 3 and 4 of the Nietzsche lectures. That's when the online versions of them begin. And we were doing online for a little bit before I learned how to tape them. So we actually went online for the Nietzsche 3 and 4 Nietzsche lectures, but the tapes start partway through that. But just that's the explanation of not everything we've done together is online. But in terms of your background, those are definitely useful backgrounds to have here. I would say especially the Kant stuff. When he's thinking of the previous history of thinking about time here, Aristotle, Kant, and Bergson are the 3 people he's thinking about the most, and Kant is definitely the one who influences him the most. That doesn't mean he's agreeing with Kant on time, but when he's trying to set off his own understanding from other positions, the one that he both will assume that the people he's talking to know the best, and the one that he's sort of trained on the most is the Kantian understanding from time, especially from the first critique. For those who are familiar with that. But okay, great, and feel free to ask the questions. You know, some people feel like if I haven't done the reading, I can't ask a question. You can ask a question if you don't understand something for sure, and we'll do what we can with it. All right, thanks for that. Isabel, you want to go next?
Hold on, here I am. There. Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I did do the reading, like but Stan and Pete said it was quite some time ago. And so when I did go back and do the a couple of the sections, The Last God and Time Space, and I want just to announce that I finally broke down and bought the book, which I had been borrowing from the library. And I think my library was very fed up with me because I was keeping them so long, and they were borrowing them from Boston, from different local little towns. So, but I'm so happy I did because I can write little notes on the margin, and I can translate my Greek and put the translation right away instead of having to look it up every time, since I didn't want to write on the library book. I come, I had come from zero philosophical background, very little Aristotle through Dante, and little Plato, Republic when I was a teenager, and the physics, Aristotle's later on. But I had always understood after reading Being in Time, again in a Zoom session like yours, Jason, that that Dasein, to me, in order to understand what Dasein was I did it in the language that I did understand, and that was grammar. So I had always understood Dasein as being space-time, not space and time, space-time, one entity. I had already understood that from Being in Time. I'm very I'll be very happy to hear what you say about time space, time and space, and time space. How time space was more originary than space and time, but we must understand clearly space and time separately before we go back to this amalgam of space time. So, and I also understood Dasein grammatically and assigning it to statement question, Dasein, statement question. And finally, that's logic analysis. And the grammatical analysis was noun question. I mean, noun verb. So I'll be looking forward to space-time. I have an inkling, I little bit understand that. The last God, am I to understand that the last God is associated or somehow to be anticipated or not in the first beginning, or is it the announcement of the other beginning? Or does the last God stride both the first and the other beginning? And in reference to something that Heidegger said a long time ago, again in Being in Time, and grammatically speaking, he spoke about always already there, with the facticity of Dasein finds himself always already there. And I was so marveled and amazed at the fact that he had discovered a new tense, the always already. Now we have the present, the past, the preterite, the imperfect, the future, the conditional, the subjunctive. Wow, now we have the always already. And it seems to me that perhaps what we have here is the always already is the tense of the event. It's the tense of the event. So it's perhaps one way to, again, don't come from a philosophical background, to understand this, which he wants us to so much now in this later Heidegger, to understand the event. And let's see. Well, I think there are many more, but that's all I wrote down.
That's great. So I'll jump in the last two. The always already, definitely something which is more in being time than here, but the same kind of move is being done here of things which are structural about all this, we would say, are invariants that have this always already character. His immediate model for that is actually Kant. It's when Kant is finding necessary structures of the understanding as a prioris of understanding, something like that. Those are always already structures in Heidegger's terms. So they are, but Heidegger is vastly expanding the space of such things in the just investigation of Dasein, analytical Dasein in being in time. And here we're still talking about, well, not still, here in this section on time space, we are talking about some of those things which have the character of analytic of Dasein, have the character of always alreadys. So that part for sure. Is that because it's about event, not simply. Event has many senses, but event is not simply a structure. The whole point of event is that, yes, it has the attributes of uniqueness, but because it has the attributes of uniqueness, it's claiming that sometimes the unique thing that happens is what matters and not the structure. In a way, the focus on the always already and finding an invariant structure, of finding an always true, of finding something which you can say is true across nature of minds as such, was very much what the older scientific philosophy prided itself on doing. It was trying to find the generalities because it was trying to find the essences, because it was trying to find the ideas. All of that is tracing back to the metaphysical assumption that the general is the real, something like that. And the focus on the event is pointing towards ways in which the event-like is the actual, and the event-like therefore doesn't have the same commonality, not necessarily the same commonality. Now there's overlap there. There are structural things attached to the event that do have an always already character. They're true of all events, but there are also events that are where the important thing is the single thing that happens once, right? And that's not simply a structure. On the question you had about the last God, is it meant to be connected to the first beginning or the other beginning? He connects it very strongly to the other beginning as he calls the other beginning. Well, he's correlating two things. If we're moving into a new time space, as he puts it, a new era of history, in which the decision will be will occur about the absconding or return of the gods, something like that. But it's the time of a decision rather than an outcome of that decision, something like that. But that he also directly lines up with the other beginning. When we get to the section on the last God, we'll also see that he says last, which is an interesting superlative, but he also almost immediately also connects it to a first, in a somewhat curious way. And we'll get to that. But the fact that he chooses the superlative last and not the superlative highest or deepest or first, right, is something we should pay attention to. He has his reasons for wanting to put the superlative in the mode of last. Okay, but again, all that's got to get into that more detail when we get to the actual discussion of the last God section. Other Jason, good questions, by the way.
Yes, I was interested in this problem that we have. He talks about, of course, Dasein is universal, but then he goes into discussion about sheltering, and that's for the few, for the rare. Are these people kind of like structurally responsible for civilization, or it's just, some kind of problem with resources and the way people have being? They just don't have the truth, and only few people have the truth, or those few people that have the truth are supposed to keep us from annihilating ourselves. I mean, I didn't understand how the last God comes into this discussion, but I can see he's trying to develop this kind of literary view of human existence, and I don't think it's structural, but it certainly isn't something that people are going to, find easy to understand or even to cooperate with. It's
So yeah, you're getting at
obviously
you're getting at the sort of social structural aspect of what he's talking about there in both the sheltering section and the future ones section. There's some notion of this kind of spiritually enlightened elite giving society its character or something like that, and that's related in barely sketched out ways to the tenor of the rest of the society or something like that. And you're absolutely right to put your finger on those as things which are issues in those two sections. It's very much about the something like the communication, spread, or reproduction of truth socially, as well as forward in time, and how do insights occur and can they spread there? And he deals with these, what we would consider the social political aspects of that, very cursorily, always assuming the conclusion from the standpoint of anyone who sees it as problematic, right? He's just jumping to what he thinks he knows is the answer. And a lot of that is the influence of the tradition he comes out of. The whole tradition of German idealism and of Nietzsche after it is in this direction of this believing that the thoughts and actions at the intellectual peaks are the most important determining factors in history, something like that. Or to put it in Nietzschean terms, that thought that comes on dove's feet guide the world. And that he shares that, that understanding of these things. But we do have to examine how true or not true it is, and how simplistic that understanding of these things might be in some of these places, especially when you're talking about things like the way in which sheltering truth works, or the way in which how many of the future ones are there, and what is happening to the rest of the world when the future ones is a tiny sect of a few solitaries of the only ones who see any of the truths that Heidegger is talking about. How does he envision all that? So very live issue. The whole second and third parts of our 4 sections are going to be focused on that kind of question. Do you have other thoughts, reactions to that, or just want to raise the issue?
Well, I was also wondering, is he meant to be optimistic or is he pessimistic? Because I mean, when you look at his work as a whole, he's kind of pessimistic, but I still think he has some kind of sense that we do have a way forward.
He does think that we have a way forward, but he will tell you very directly in the section on the future ones. This is page 314, section 250 in italics. Our own hour is the era of downgoing, which is Untergehen, which is also perishing in German, right? It's the Das Untergehen des Abendlandes is the decline of the West, is the title of Spengler, it's that word, right? Our own hour is the era of downgoing. So from his point of view, the current situation is one of spiritual crisis or decline, as the reign of a self-confident technicity and positivism, if you like, that is treating truth more and more instrumentally and less of being a matter of any spiritual importance. And that is going along with the kind of disenchanting of the world. He does think there is a way out of that. He thinks he's sketching the way out of that in this book. So he does have a program and a way forward, but it is a way forward from a crisis, which is he expects to sweep the globe. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Great question. All right, Josh?
Yeah, I've read it a number of times. I reread it this morning, and as far as I'm concerned, one of the most critical aspects of Heidegger's work is his thinking on time, or here time space. And I think that how one reads the rest of Heidegger is crucially dependent on how one understands what he's trying to offer in terms of his understanding of time. And so there's a range of interpreters of Heidegger, very prominent ones, and I argue that what they have in common is a certain reading of his notion of time, which I consider to be sort of an ordinary disclosure what I mean by that is sort of what an object of experience inheres as a temporary present, occupying a time position. As objective presence, it persists or endures as itself, even if only instantaneously. So as an example of this, for example, in Richard Campobianco, he talks about, says the simple being itself is a temporal spatial flow of all beings, the coming and going, appearing and disappearing, arriving and departing of beings, the emerging and lingering and passing away of all that is. And we, Dasein, are carried along this flow, temporally stretched out. So for me to sort of encapsulate what I think is crucial about this way of reading time is that it mistakes ordinary time for what Heidegger maybe earlier in his writing called original time. So according to that, I think the mistaken understanding of Heideggerian time is to understand a being is either here or it's gone, it's either something or it's nothing, it either shines forth or it vanishes. There's meaning or absence of meaning, but even if a being lingers for only a split second before it's gone, it is never both present and absent at the same time as the same identity. And I'd argue that that's precisely what Heidegger offers us with this radical notion of time or time space, that presence and absence are, in a certain sense, you have to be careful to say they're simultaneous, but they appear together. It's not something that appears, lingers for a while and then vanishes. That's precisely the notion of time that Heidegger's critiquing, and the fact that it's pervasive among Heidegger interpreters, in my opinion, means that all the rest of his work gets misread as something more sort of existential, and you end up lumping him together with Kierkegaard and figures like that, and it makes Heidegger, profoundly uninteresting to me, because I think that the radicality of work is profoundly missed when your starting point is that notion of time, and you think that that's what Heidegger is getting at. Of course, this is just my take on it, but I feel strongly about that.
All right, you have to give your own version of the proper understanding of time in contrast to that, then.
Well, that time is it is
First of all, I should say, before you get going, I agree with you that what you've described as conventional understanding is only something about one temporal aspects of beings, and it's not time as part of the structure of the Da and time as fundamental to the base of Dasein or something like that. On that, I agree with you, but I want you to flesh it out with your own positive statement about what you would say is a more correct understanding of time from your point of view in Heidegger.
Yeah, so my view is that time comes from the future. The future sort of deposits itself as the present, and then the having been at the same time. This is all the same gesture. The future, out of which the present emerges, and then is the having been. So in a sense, the having been, the past, arises from the future, whereas in the conventional notion, the past is analyzed on the basis of an already presupposed present understanding, and the future is projected forward from this already presupposed present understanding. So both the past and the future are understood on the basis of a present, whereas it's the future which drives both past and present.
I'm going to partly agree with you that Heidegger certainly sees Dasein as a future-directed structure, if I can put it that way. But he also will speak of both time and the moment as the gathering of the different ecstasies of time, where by the different ecstasies of time we mean in the direction of the not yet, in the direction of the having been, in the direction of the around, right, of the present. And this is all there in the being and time basic problems of phenomenology era, as opposed to the time space discussion in front of us now. But the gathering is the root notion he's using there. But the gathering transport is what we're going to get in our proper section here, and that notion of transport is precisely that. In the same way that Dasein is thrown into a world, Dasein is thrown into a world moving, right? There's nothing stationary about Dasein's temporal experience, if we put it that way. So in that regard, yes, the futureness of it and the futureness of the projections is essential. I think that we can even go beyond some of what Heidegger says, at least here, to tease out how that's involved in time and space differentiating in a way that may go beyond what Heidegger explicitly says here. We first have to make sure we understand what he explicitly says here. But the time-space structure is meant to be some underlying individuating, actualizing thing. And as I say, thing is not really a thing. It's a structure of the Da that tells us something essential about what actual truth is like, right? Actual truth has a certain character, and that certain character is this uniqueness character. You might, in old tradition, say an embodied character, or a temporal, in the scholastic sense, character, part of this world, part of in time, part of the universe, actualized. And the time-space aspect of that embodiedness comes with other things attached to it too. It's not just those. But the problem he sets himself in the time-space section is both to explain that structure in its unity, and then also to try to account for how it is that time and space come to be distinguished from that phenomenal level. And he's trying to do that independent of how the tradition has treated them. He knows that you have to look at how the tradition has treated them to sort of clear away the misconceptions that might stand in the way of treating it in this sort of phenomenal, original way he's trying to. But one of the things he has to account for in terms of the account he's trying to give, his account is signed up to try to give us an explanation for why space and time are experienced as fundamentally different from one another. And that's something this time-space section purports to do. We have to see how well it does it, or if there's extra things we would supplement it with that may point more in this future direction thing you're talking about. Does that help?
Yeah. I just would be careful in the use of the metaphor of motion, for example, in the physical movement of something, because that gets you back to the ordinary notion of time, because you've got a presupposed basis on the basis of which the whole notion of motion is made possible. It's a motion of something. It's incremental change of degree, not of kind. But when you have change of kind, I don't know that, it changes the whole notion of what motion could mean.
Motion is certainly a problem we'll have to address here, but I think that the motion that comes out of this, the understanding of time space here, is only the spatial version. The thing which he's getting at in his own technical term here, when he says transport, is that if you like, that's a metaphor of spatial motion, but it's not mine, it's Heidegger's. He's the one who calls it transport and explicitly connects transport to the time part of the time-space duality, while captivating to the space component of the time-space duality. Dan has a question or a thought.
Yeah, I think to me the Heidegger story is something like for the Greeks being show on this horizon of time, like presence, permanence, and so on. And since then, we continue to go deeper, like more and more superficially into this, and we forgot about this aspect of time. And his project in being in time is to show this temporality again, and now at this time he wants to go even deeper and try to build a project where it's not just time, it's space time or something like that, or
time space.
Yeah, and so it goes beyond time. But I think his project in being in time was time. He wanted there, I don't know if intentionally or not, but he wanted to show that it's time. But then he realized it started as time for the Greeks, and we need to go beyond that. Like a second beginning needs to go beyond just time. So being now should show up not just time, but time space, or even more deeper than that. And this
Right.
is
So
event and so on.
I don't think this is incorrect, but there's two other things to understand at the being time layer, right? Yes, he's focusing on time, but he's focusing on time in the analytic of Dasein. And so this is something about being, and it's something about the horizon of understanding being, but he's trying to show that as part of the structure of Dasein as existence as this between. And for him, the Dasein and that betweenness is the single most important aspect of that. It was entirely possible for neo-Kantians in particular to read that being and time stuff as being just explaining ways in which there are additional illusions of the understanding projected by Dasein as the subjective pole of mind, whether they're there or not, whether they're real or not, right? And that's not what he meant at all, right? But it's entirely possible to read some of those structures as necessary projections of the subjective pole of consciousness, something like that. One of the reasons we're getting to the time space thing after the Dasein section, after the essence of truth section, is he thinks he's already dealt with those objections. He thinks he's shown that phenomenally we're at the level of, when we're analyzing Dasein, we're at, as he puts it, the grounding, although the grounding in an unground, but a grounding. And that means he does not think we're at the level of projections and illusions anymore, something like that. But that we are just trying to discuss time space in a way that includes things that previous traditions would have seen as consciousness or subjective or subject or mental poles of the experience, that Heidegger is not treating as illusions, but as things about which we have phenomenal information directly. That's what he thinks the previous sections have gotten us to, right? So that part of the new thing here is that we're no longer in anything like Kantian. This is just a structure of the mind projects situation. Yes, he's going to talk about projection both here and in the being section going ahead, but the fundamental point about the projection is a neo-Kantian is inclined to read something as projection as being an illusion, and Heidegger is not. He thinks that projection is there for a reason, and that reason is actual contact with what being is saying. Pete?
Yeah, I was confused by his use of the word transport.
Yes.
And I looked up the German, and the common translation for his word is rapture, as in being transported up by the Holy Spirit, like Saint Teresa of Avila or something.
Yes.
Rather than motion going from A to B.
It's both. That notion is there in rapture as well. Similarly, the captivating has the notion of fascinating attention, and it also has the notion of being held prisoner. And he even at one point says that each of these things has a disposed aspect and a countercurrent, right? There's a first sense in which captivating is alienating, he says, or estranging. I think that says the alienating, it's estranging. And similarly, transport seems to be a dispersion. So in his own glosses about these things having a moment and a countercurrent, he is acknowledging that that transport has a notion of dispersion as well as a notion of brought to, and captivating has a notion of something like riveted attention or fascination, but also a notion of captured, held, irrespective of will, something like that. And the term that he will wind up using for both of them is embrace. The thing which transport and captivation have in common is embrace, right? So the way to think about this is something like the unique there-ness of our existence is an embrace of us by being, right? And that is the more underlying sense he's claiming of this with a world having an around of Dasein, something like that. So again, we have to gloss these two aspects, but to get to that, Heidegger first needs to make the point that the time and space that we experience comes disposed, which means equipped with a disposition, right? It doesn't come as an analytical Cartesian abstraction of a background about a movie screen. It comes with feeling attached. It comes with emotional attached. It comes with, involved attached. It's something about us, right? And that's there in this notion of embrace, in the notion of the moment as a gathering of otherwise dispersed elements of our temporal being. And that moment is specifically the moment for decision with the future orientation, to back to Josh's point, right? There's a notion in which moment is temporally associated with present, but not simply as a moving point, but associated with present as the moment of decision, and that decision is about something, it's about the future, right? But that's the gathering component. And then this captivated component is, it can be estranging, it can feel compelled. It's the passive in the thrown into, right? But it's also a captivation in the sense of a fascinated by, or attention held by. So a captivating and transported, or held and raptured, as well as living and disposed embrace, right? And all of this is basically giving a phenomenal unpacking of the experience of what is the uniqueness of Dasein. And by uniqueness, I mean not simply personality or being a self, but being in a here, being in a now, right? Being in a, not even a here and a now, but a full timeline. And with an around, with a just ahead, all those structures that we had in being and time. He's explaining that, if I can put it this way, we would tend to say embodiedness, but it's not focused on the body part of it. It's focused on the fact that you are actual, right? You are in a place and a time. You do not live in an abstract ether. You do not live in an abstract moment, right? There is a concreteness, which is being wrapped around you tighter than a blanket, right? That's why he's calling it an embrace. So and all of these moments of this have and are meant to have meaningful or emotional valences, not just analytical, abstract, physics dissection ones, right? Does any of that help on the space-time aspect, or transporting captivation?
Yeah, although the notion of embrace and so forth makes being seem more of a thing rather than a structure. That there's that being is something out there that
It's not saying it's an object pressing up against us, but it is that we have this aroundness, right? And the multiple dimensional character of that aroundness is an essential part of the being actual of ourselves, right? This is why he calls it a structure of transport captivation, a grounded structure of the there. Grounded structure of the there. He's trying to explain that this is. All right, I'll put it in Kantian or neo-Kantian terms, right? He's trying to explain why we're not an abstract camera looking at a screen, right? That's not a good picture of what we are, right? We are grounded actuals, differentiated grounded actuals, embraced by space, embraced by time, transported and captivated. We are, you can't step out of space, you can't step out of time, and you are always, you are temporally extended and always future directed, moving in that regard, changing in that regard. Okay, and this is why he says, you know, in the beginning of this in 238, he's referring back to what he didn't discover in being in time. He says, the between of the turning indeed, as explicitly steadfast in a historical way, determines itself as the here and now, the uniqueness of Dasein. Accordingly, uniqueness of knowingly enduring what is assigned and bestowed. The point is to feel this embraced here and nowness as a assigned and bestowed that is part of what Dasein endures as its existence, right? Part of our actuality, our in-timeness, our embodiedness is that we endure an assigned and bestowed here-ness and nowness, right? And that is a core base structure, not just on which Dasein is constructed, but which Dasein is, right? It's why there's a there in the being there.
Right, and it sounds like thrownness. We're thrown into.
Yes, it's definitely thrownness as well. But I mean, the throne is getting the aspect. Yes, this is definitely, he's trying to go deeper than just the thrownness idea. The thrownness idea is that there's something suffered, endured, or not simply chosen in the here and nowness of our existence. And that moment is exactly the same. But that it also has the moments of captivated and transported is not necessarily there in the thrownness, right? Okay. Okay. So leaving aside some of the early sections where he's basically just dealing with the previous understandings and trying to get some of those things out of the way, the sections where he gets to time space as abyssal ground, and originary unity of time and space that has this. There's various things there about trying to understand abyss correctly, because abyss means bottomless. That's what it means, right? It means without ground. So he's trying to talk about an ungrounded ground. But what is that trying to do? That's trying to explain how there can be a base structure, which is at the base of what to a Kantian would be background projected limitless spaces on which things can occur, right? The background projected limited spaces in which things occur is not actually bottomless. It actually has a structural base, and that structural base is this here and nowness structure. Okay. Abyssal ground happens as the staying away of the ground. That's that point about you're never simply in your background. You're always in something on top of that background. You're particular. You're not an abstraction. Okay. The part about this occurring in a disposed way, or occurring, equipped with a disposition. So this is 304. Space is the captivating and abyssal grounding of the embrace. Time is the transporting and abyssal grounding of the gathering. The captivation is the abyssal embrace of the gathering. The transporting is the abyssal gathering into the embrace. Right? It says in each case there's a countercurrent at work. For transporting, seems at first to be a dispersing, and captivation and estrangement. Captivation appears to be estrangement because it's like we're thrown into a world which isn't ours, right? The transporting seems to be a dispersing into the different ecstasies of time, as opposed to a unifying into a self or something like that. But he says that that countercurrent is essential and points to the originary referential of each to each other, right? We'll ignore that one at the bottom because there's a problem with it, but the intimation and the hesitant withholding aspect that he has at the top of 304 are both part of, they're the signs of the felt more, of the felt not fully articulate more. There's something hesitantly withheld in that transporting captivation. He'll argue later that there's a sublime felt limitlessness behind our time and space sense, which he sees as being at the base of the later common mathematization of time, right? Where does the unlimited in the mathematization of time come from? And he answers with something like a sublime-like sense of an always more in the felt time and space embodiedness, something like that. Okay. The critical thing to understand here is that methodologically, Heidegger has given himself license to pay attention to the felt moments of the phenomenal experience of these things, right? A whole lot of structure had to be built up beforehand to get to that point. He does not think that that sense of captivated transport is anything illusory. It is in fact direct information about the structure of actuality, what actuality is like, what actual truth is like, what event is like. Which is why the time-space section comes where it does in this book. And also why he's calling this abyssal ground. I don't know how easy it is to follow this, but to me, it reminds me of some of the discussions of being in time where he's just giving, direct phenomenal explanation of some of these structures of Dasein that were maybe more obvious then. The being just ahead of oneself, the always already having a world, those sorts of structures, which are kind of easier for a neo-Kantian to see or to notice. The fact that there's the structure of attention as a just ahead of yourself, right? In both the spatial and temporal senses, right? It's that same kind of thing he's doing here, but he's focused now on this embraced, wrapped in captivating transport. If I wanted to put this in terms of a scholastic, before he's going to try to tell you what time is or trying to tell you what space is, he wants to tell you what temporal existence is like, as though you were an angel who had never heard of it and had to have it explained to you, right? And you're not, so you can, line it up with things that you can directly experience, but he still has to explain why existing in time, existing in space has felt characters to it. Okay. Why does this matter so much? This matters so much because he's trying to get to the notion of actual truth as something that actually has to occur in times and places to Dasein. He's trying to explain a necessity of Dasein for actual truth occurring, right? And that means he's differentiating any of this from the notion that truth is a Platonic form. Often the realm of the idea is that occasionally some sentences manage to capture in a way that is transmittable from one mind to another if they understand how to translate the appropriate language or something like that, right? That very abstract notion of truth is what he's steering away from. He wants an embodied and actualized notion of not only how truth happens, but what it is, what gets to count as true, right? It has to make contact with actuality in this sense, or it's, you know, hypothesis in possible worlds, not actual. Questions about any of that? If we don't have questions about that, I do have a criticism of at least one of what he's saying here, which is there's a place where he's trying to explain how time and space separate. If I can put it this way. Let's see if I can find this exactly. Right. This is on 304, first full paragraph. Then whence the separation into temporalization and spatialization from the transporting and captivating, which as fundamentally different require each other, i.e. from the unity of the hesitant withholding. Now, the first thing to notice is that the unity of the hesitant withholding cannot be what makes them fundamentally different, precisely because it is the structure they share, right? He needs the transporting and captivating to line up with the temporalization and spatialization in a way that fundamentally distinguishes them from each other like dimensions, but which is not simply part of the unity of the hesitant withholding. But when he's asked to put his finger on why they're so different here, he puts his finger on what they actually, the structure they actually share. The next question is it true that temporalization is never captivating and spatialization is never transporting? I don't think so. Sorry, question from Josh. Josh, just on mute.
Yeah. The phrase in time and in space, I'd want to sort of, you know, kind of look at that closely, because that can maybe give different or connections about relation, or, you know, time in relation to being that might imply time as something in relation to which there being, or the event is an event. So, you know, I've always distinguished between those something in
Sorry, you're breaking up, Josh. It's a connection issue, I think. It's not a no problem with your thought, but problem with your connection. Can you back up a little bit? You were talking about the avoiding the, oh, he's gonna come out and come back in. I think the point he was trying to make is about the avoiding the metaphor of in these things like in a box or in a space, which can refer back to the, you know, the Kantian background, you know, infinite empty orders, something like that, which is meant to be an overlying and emergent and only partly correct structure generated from the level we're trying to talk about. So, you know, that's a fair point. I don't think it gets to this issue of that I'm trying to raise about whether or not temporalization and spatialization and transporting and captivating differ from one another, because it is obvious that only temporalization is transporting and only spatialization is captivating, and that there is never the cross. Why do I put it this way? Because you can easily get the more captivating just by treating one of these two as more general, and you can get the transporting simply by treating one of these as more unique. And they both have the aspect of unique, and they both have the aspect of general. Both are inescapable as the general, and both are unique as the singular. So it seems to me, a case can be made that there is captivating and transport in temporalization, that there is captivating and transport in spatialization. He wants that to be the place or way in which they fall off as distinguished from one another. I think he's right about the underlying structure. here that brings them together in something like time space. And I think he's right that they do fall apart and they do distinguish one another phenomenally at this level. But I don't think the reason is that these aspects, terms, or felt experiences of transporting and captivating only strictly apply to one and not to the other. I think there's a different structure in Dasein involved, which is about our own capacity, our own powers in these things. We can, in the near ahead, change where we are in space. It's the basic power we have as a motion choosing thing, something like that. We cannot do something comparable to that in time. Although in either we can shift our attention. We can put our attention on the past. We can put our attention on the future. We can put our attention on the now. But that's not the same thing as our causally interacting through the world local motion ability. We do not have that same ability in time as we do in space. So there is a sense in which the transporting is more keenly felt in the temporal direction, if I can put it this way. Similarly, I don't think that we experience the spatially distinct from us only through the medium of motion. And that may be because we're, naively not physicists enough to recognize that light reaching our eyes takes time. But if you imagine the sense of spatial captivation distinction between you're in a 10 by 10 cell for a year versus you're on the top of a mountain with views unlimited in every direction and a night sky above you for a year, you will have a very different sense of spatial captivation in the two cases. And the reason is simply, what are the limits of my vision? So the point that I'm making is, I think that the way in which these different aspects, transporting and captivating, attach to the two dimensions of the temporal and the spatial, winds up referring back to our powers, not simply to those felt aspects themselves, right? Our active powers, what we can and cannot do by will, if you put it that way. Okay. I think the rest of this makes sense, but that would be my critique here. I think that he makes it too easy on himself as to how these things distinguish from each other by too sharply going from temporalization to transport to the sense of transport without explaining why, without grounding why. Okay. Now, is my explanation more cognitive science and more neo-Kantian and his more base of being? I don't know. Maybe. I do think, though, that on his own terms, the structure of temporalization, the structure of transporting and captivating he's described is there at the level of time space itself. It's not yet fully differentiated at that level. So I don't think on its own that's enough to make them as phenomenally distinct as they in fact are for us. But if you could ask why we have the different powers in that regard and turn it back into his piece of it, fine. But we do in fact have those different powers, so we're going to feel them differently. We're going to feel the captivation differently as a spatial rather than a temporal thing. Thoughts or questions on my slight critique there? Okay. Sorry, Josh.
I apologize. Yeah, it sounded like you were offering a key argument there, and
didn't hear it. Got it. Because you had technical difficulties, you tried to leave and come back. Yeah.
I missed it. Could you say in a couple of sentences the distinction between a cognitive science and a Heideggerian
I'm not saying that it actually is. I'm just saying that that criticism can be leveled against what I tried to say. What I tried to say was that when he tries to, first of all, when he's talking about the hesitant withholding on page 304, the unity of the hesitant withholding that unifies the transporting and captivating, I think there he has not yet shown how temporalization and spatialization differ from one another and why they feel so distinct, if I can put it that way. Because it seems to me that the transporting and the captivating can apply to both moments. That is, captivation can apply not just to spatialization, but also to temporalization. If you take the temporalization in the all rather than the unique sense, and transporting can for spatialization as well, if you think of the transporting not simply in the unique, but in the all sense. So
Okay.
there is a notion here where what's distinct about the two things in the way he first presents it is really just whether or not he's taking this as a all of that or as the one unique of that where you are of that or where you experience of that. And I think both of them, both the transporting and captivating, each have both of those moments. And I was trying to trace why they nevertheless feel distinct to a difference in our powers. Dasein's powers are powers to control in the near ahead where we are in space, greatly exceed our abilities to do the same thing with respect to time, right? We make near ahead locomotion decisions, motion in space decisions. And for both, we can change our attention. We can put our attention on the past, we can put our attention on the future, we can put our attention on the near, we can put our attention on the far. But irrespective of our attention, our actual action causally through the world, changing where we are, not what we pay attention to. That is where there is a difference between them that makes the captivation sense of the universal the one which is more felt for space, because we don't feel that same way about our the captivation to unique space. We don't feel captivated to unique space. Instead, we feel that transport is not something undergone, but as something we do. So there is a phenomenal difference based upon the powers of Dasein between them that is differentiating them. And I was saying that might make my explanation more cog-sci or neo-Kantian structure rather than basis of being as Heidegger wants it to be. Or it could be that you could trace his version of it to why we have those difference in powers, something like that. But I see that difference in Dasein's powers as being essential to how this captivating attaches more to space and this transporting attaches more to time, because both of them could be felt of either moment to me. Sorry, Josh.
I think I understand. Is there a certain attachment here or reliance on that argument on a certain notion of subjective consciousness that it doesn't make sense without presupposing a consciousness in front of which appear?
I don't think so, because I'm thinking exactly of our not simply consciousness and not simply theoretical and not simply spectator, but our pragmatic acting through the world differences in powers with respect to these two felt moments. I think that the felt moments of transporting and captivation in this hesitant withholding sense of the more around the way in which we are embraced in our uniqueness, in our locatedness, I think that structure, that time-space structure he's shown as unitary, is unitary, and I think it has both those aspects in both the dimensions on its own. But there's a difference in how they are felt because of the difference in our practical powers, not our theoretical senses, but our practical powers, which differ across the two.
Yeah, I mean, are practical powers something that are held by an entity that then uses them?
They are exercised in the mode of projections that are found to be realized, right? They're projections that start as verb and turn into accomplished.
I'm thinking of
Derrida. That's what I mean by power. That's what I mean by power. Sorry.
Okay, I'm thinking of Derrida's interpretation of Heidegger, where the subject doesn't pre-exist the projection. The subject is
Sure.
emerges in the projection, but
and I'm not disagreeing with that, right? Because precisely the thing that I'm tracing this to is a realized accomplished act that involves having gone through the projection loop successfully, if you pardon the operational way of putting it. I am captivated in space only in a more global sense because I have freedom in the local sense, in the sense of a power of just ahead locomotion. And I feel that freedom from captivation to the specific, the unique place that I am, as essential to why I project in the first place, right? I'm not trying to watch more interesting movies. I'm making decisions about where to move. Those are two different things. Anyway, so I don't think any of that necessarily disagrees with the idea that it is a pragmatic and through projection emergence of content itself. But this may be taking us too far afield. This was meant to be just a place where I see an objection to one of the things he says here. The other place I have an objection, but it may be a removable, more linguistic, rhetorical, if you like, objection is at the bottom of that same page. He says, even in their unity, space and time have nothing in common. Instead, what unifies them and allows them to emerge in that inseparable referentiality is time-space, the abyssal grounding of the ground, and the essential occurrence of truth. He's just given us a whole bunch of things that they do have in common, right? In this underlying structure. And there's other things they have in common. They are disposed. They are, pointing towards event likeness. They are pointing towards a uniqueness characteristic of the Da, right? All of these are definitely things that they do have in common. So I think this is just it's an almost rhetorical phrase. He wants to reserve for the term time space the things they have in common and restrict to the restrict the use of the terms space and time separately to the things they do not have in common. But such linguistic fiats do not suffice to actually cause them to not have things in common when they do. Anyway, that's just another place here where he says something that jars on its face. You can disprove on its face, so to speak. But that may be, just he's trying to teach a point that's hard to reach otherwise. All right, I want to give Josh first you a chance to come back with some other things you might want to say about the time-space section. Otherwise, I want to start moving on to sheltering.
We can move on.
Okay. All right, let's talk about sheltering. And as someone mentioned, this is especially dealing with the question of the publicness of truth, something like that. It's how does truth go from being something which is a barely felt intimation to a sensitive mind into something which is instantiated in beings, and as he puts it, whence does this sheltering derive its urgency and necessity? So the first point is he claims pretty strongly here that truth does not essentially occur without such a sheltering in beings, which you wouldn't have to claim on the rest of his positions. But this is almost like saying until you've nailed down the insider experience, with a being that instantiates it, you haven't arrived at essential truth. The unveiling component of what the word truth refers to has not yet been consummated, right? There's something about what gets to count as truth as unveiling for which it is not sufficient that you had a vague feeling of an intimation, right? Okay, this is about looking on page 307. Find a way from beings to the essential currents of truth and to make visible on this way, sheltering is something that belongs to the truth. So this term sheltering, what is it for? What is being sheltered? What is being sheltered is something like the truth as unveiledness of a truth of being, something like that. So unveiledness is not simply a happening, it's not simply a subjective happening. It's something which actually comes to pass in actuality, right? And that the actualization of occurrence of truth happens as the sheltering of truth in beings. And in beings includes in language, means bringing to speech. It means in poetry, in works of art, in action, in tools, etc. And he wants to distinguish his notion of what that actualization character needed for truth. He wants to explain how that is different from the notion of the truth as a Platonic idea that has some imprint into a hyle or matter that is its carrier, something like that. This is on 308. Okay. So the first point is that the truth has to make it to the level of beings to count as unveiled. Does everyone see the phenomenal necessity of that claim for his own position, or is this obscure? Why he would worry about this at all? Why is this going to matter? I mean, when we get to the future ones, we're going to discover that there are some things about understanding truths of beings that are the preserve of a few sensitive or enlightened ones. And the question of the communicability or lack thereof of whatever it is they have learned is going to be acute, right? So sheltering of truth in beings is how that is supposed to happen. Is how that works. But he says that in all these things there is still some element of self-concealment. You do not capture a truth in a sentence, and then when with the sentence published, the truth is known as everyone walks past the sentence. The truth hits them, right? There is always an element of understanding even a discovered and sheltered in being's truth that is the act or accomplishment of the audience, of the later reader, of those who come after, who have to rediscover what was discovered, and the beings in which it is sheltered make it more accessible, reduce the work involved in doing it, but they can't reduce it to zero, or it would lose the character of truth. It would lose the character of discovery. It would lose the character of uncovering. Sorry, is there a chat question? Oh, sorry. Peter's just being helpful with a text. Thank you. Right. So the point is that there's an element of sheltering that requires that there is a it remains the case that there is inquiring work needed to arrive at the truth from the sheltering of a truth in beings. And Heidegger is contrasting that in this section with the way in which you can have, put it this way, a technological instantiation of the operative truth in question, something like that. This is on 309, where he says, as technology is brought into service more and more, not only will technology itself develop, but its power will also increase beyond all measure and beyond check. There's not occur still greater and more essential meditation on the grounding of Dasein as a necessity which demands stillness and long preparation that hasn't suddenness of the moments. Why is this coming up here? Because the dream of technology is that an expert can discover the operational truth of something. He can instantiate it in devices that shelter that truth. And even if no future Dasein ever knows that truth again, it will still operate and succeed. And machinations will simply go forward with that truth encapsulated in their function, right? And human beings may be less and less able to penetrate the web of those things, and they may eventually get to the point where they don't even bother, right? And they will, this is the savage in the technological world end state of the machines built by people long ago who knew how certain pieces of it function have long since died off, and now the people who walk around among them have no idea how they function and no even curiosity as to how they function or what discovered truths were instantiated into them, and the functioning remains, but the truthiness has disappeared, if you get me. Is this problematic clear? Dan, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I think by about this time, Heidegger is, he's always talking against metaphysics, but I think his definition of metaphysics by this time is like, we start with the truth of being. So we take this as the ground zero in metaphysics. We take this kind of like we take the beings and the truth of beings at ground zero. And while he's saying here, we need to go beyond that. There is more there, and this is what means to not to stay in metaphysics and to do more and to do this kind of philosophizing that I'm doing is don't take this truth of beings as ground zero. And
I think that's partly right, but there's a more, I don't know if it's more basic. There's a slightly different thing happening here, which is he's concerned about whether or not the truthy character of the discovered truths remains for those who did not first find them. And when they access them, do they access them as truths? Are they discoveries? Do they experience a revealing in them? Do they experience an unveiling in them? Do they feel like truth, right? And the issue with technology as a mode of revealing is that it doesn't need that. It hides that. So it's not that technology isn't a mode of revealing, it absolutely is. There's no way that technological things can function if there isn't truth embodied in how they are arranged. But there's practically no need for a consciousness to understand them in order for that to obtain. So what they lose is this exposure of those in their presence to the discovered truthiness of them, so to speak. People don't have to be living, people do not need to recognize that they are living in a truth that is discoverable if their relation to past discovery is only somebody figured that out, they made a machine that encapsulates it, I don't need to know how, I don't need to know why, I just need the machine does what I want it to do when I push this button, right? The point is, when he's talking about sheltering of truth, he's not talking about encapsulating it in an object that locks it away, but still does the thing you want. That wouldn't count. It has to have this character of being a source of continued unveiling to those who interact with it, but that leaves it a task. It leaves it a piece of philosophical activity. And in the Origin of the Work of Art, he talks about how good works of art have this character. They unveil something, but they require your participation in work. You discover something about being and what you are as an understanding creature when you stand before a work of art that that is a good one that you appreciate, right? And there is no such necessity in interacting with the realm of machination from Heidegger's point of view. And that is a way in which we can say there is a nothing happening to being, or truthiness, the truthiness of technological civilization is evaporating. That's why he carries on this discussion immediately to 310 with this discussion of the machine, its essence, and the servicing it demands, the uprooting it causes. He's not thinking there sociologically primarily. He's thinking primarily about the a human being whose way of life consists in serving a machine he did not make and doesn't understand the relation to truth of, is someone who has lost his truth calling. He has been specialized away from his truth calling, and he only knows this goes here, this goes there, right? He doesn't know why the machine exists, what its function is, right? There is a reduction in the human capacity, realized human capacity level, and from Heidegger's point of view, a loss of truthiness in that. And the point is, he's differentiating that from what it means to talk about sheltering truth. Sheltering truth means giving it a way to be discoverable by others that still requires their full mental participation and work. So that when they learn it, when they experience it, when they appreciate it, they have the full truth experience, if I can put it that way. Is the concern clear? If you like, this is the Heideggerian theory of enlightenment. Sorry, Josh, go ahead.
So there's a connection here between truth and knowing and knowledge.
Yes.
It sounds like, but there's a line of argument that it's not knowledge, that Heidegger does say that that notion of truth as knowledge goes back to Kant, and you see it in Husserl and phenomenology, and truth as knowledge is a forgetfulness, and it's forgetfulness of being, because it's not able to make explicit its basis. So it's not knowing that is the truth of being, but a kind of making explicit or of the eventness of being. The eventness of being is there, I mean, in a certain sense, that it's implicit. It's implicit in machination. It's not a question of what puzzles us about machines or puzzles us about any aspect of our world. It's how we explicitly, treat our comportment for that aspect of the world, regardless of the mode, whether it's a knowing or not knowing, puzzlement or certainty. But underlying all these modes is this, the eventness is what makes all of them possible and is up there. But it can be, if it's covered over or forgotten, then it's not being made explicit.
Right. I mean, he talks about this can deteriorate into mere bustle. It can get rid of the long preparation, the stillness and long preparation for the moments of insight, about the uprooting that servicing a machine can cause, right? And how there can result the gigantic results in expansion and ever greater leveling down and emptying, the inexorable deterioration to what is ungenuine, into kitsch, meaning what is mere copy, right? The point of all of those is, yes, event character remains, yes, mode of revealing remains, yes, there's relation to truth involved in all of those forms of modern life, so to speak, but they still are deficient in this mode of sheltering revealing of truth. They are deficient in the mode of, is the human being in his action trying to be a shepherd of the truth of being, trying to be part of the place or site in which the unveiling of being happens, right? What is the way in which people in those modes are interacting with truth? You can still see the event character, you can still see the motive of revealing character looking at it from the outside, but that doesn't mean that that's what they're looking at, right? So it's not that those characters are absent, it's that they are deficient modes from the standpoint of what Heidegger is here holding up as this ideal of the sheltering of unveiling in beings. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah. I just had to add in relation to that. You'd mentioned he uses the word noisy
Yes.
in the section here, and I was going to put together a collection of all the synonyms that he uses over the course of his career to capture this. It's amusing to me, but it's
Bustle,
also
yes.
indicative here. Noisy, gossipy, bustling, and
Yes.
they're all derogatory terms. So
Yes.
imagine this. Let's say you imagine you're involved, you're an engineer and you're involved in a task and it involves great precision and you're following a plan. And from your perspective, it's all very well intentioned and very well ordered, and there's a goal involved, and it's the opposite of something that's just sort of kind of random, something that's deserving of ridicule. But from a Heideggerian perspective, these kinds of things can be or are and to recognize that how that could possibly be the case, I think it gets you a little maybe perhaps closer to understanding the difference between a certain notion of clear guided knowledge and yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair that one man's precision can be another man's noise, if someone is distracted by it, etc. But there's also just there's modes of followness that the distracted is himself subject to, and he's expressing as annoyance what are at some level his own proclivities to those modes of followness, right? If you're easily distracted, right, you complain about the noise, right? And what you're really complaining about is the fact that you can be distracted from the tasks that you consider essential to you by something that you consider trivial to you. But the fact that it can distract you is not just a failing in the distraction, it's a failing in you, right? So there's no question that those sorts of things can be, you can go through Heidegger that way, and he's got plenty of foibles in that regard. The reason I wanted to focus so much on this issue of the what is the proper sheltering of truth, what is the proper publicness of truth, is because of how important it's going to be for this future one's discussion. And we had the smart question going in of, how is he envisioning any of this happening socially, right? What is the social model here? Because the social model here becomes very clear in this section of the future ones, that it's a, for the rare, for the few, a few enlightened ones are going to understand this translation into Dasein and access to the grounded truth of being, something like that. And most people are not, and there is going to be a continued decline progression of the technological civilization happening against the backdrop of these few who can see what is going on, so to speak, from Heidegger's point of view. And he definitely has a clear, how to put it this way, an almost sociological theory of how that is going to play out, or how that is going to happen, or how can the civilization be redirected by the quiet, still thoughts of its spiritual leaders at their peaks, or not. And I put it to you that the transmissions belts between those thinkers and those they are deriding as distracted by kitsch matter for that question. And it may not be sufficient that Heidegger's and Nietzsche's write philosophic books, and some of us come along, 100 years afterwards or so, or 50 years afterwards or so, and do Zoom calls about them. Anyway, I'm trying to transition us into the future one section, but Dan, you have a thought or question?
Yeah, I'm kind of like, for me, it's like this problem, like using the word sheltering. Sheltering is kind of to protect, to keep it safe, to yes. I don't know, to force it somehow in some kind of structure. And you kind of, instead of keeping it vulnerable, open, always
yes.
Up for grabs. And then it kind of reminds me later, like he's using like with technology later in framing. It's also something like, and that's definitely not good for him there. But it seems like this sheltering is also reminding me of partially of in framing. And
so you're right to point out that what's involved here is a necessity to translate the insight out of the individual mind who had it into beings and across time to others, right? To spread across minds and to spread across time. And this is being thought of as a sheltering because there's a concern with preserving, and that concern with preserving seems to presume a temporal translatability of the truth in question, right? Or at least experience of the truth in question. This is not a matter of you could imagine a world in which change is so pervasive that there's no point in trying to do this, right? Or in which only the truths that individuals discover for themselves matter to them in a way that if you did try to preserve anything, shelter it for them, and pass it on to them, they would never get it because they would only bring their own preconceptions to the table or something like that. That is not where he is, right? And there's folks who think that the history moment or the time moment or some of the bringing the subject pull back in moments of Heidegger mean that he's going to be against anything like anything smacking of persistence, because that's too much like Platonic permanence or Platonic eternity. That's not what you get in Heidegger, right? There's a positive accent on the temporally long-lived, even though he is still emphasizing its temporal character, right? He is acutely conscious of the difficulty of translating anything like thought forward to successors in time, because he knows how much work it is to understand any thinker of the past. He sees all the ways in which they have misunderstood each other and resulting missteps have happened. So he is in that sense, although he is taking down to bricks the various elements of the tradition, he's still interested in how traditions function, right? He's still interested in being able to pass on discovery, because otherwise discovery dies with its discoverer, not sufficient. And in the notion of history as history of the unveiling of the truth of being, there is a collective and progressive activity character to that notion of history, right? And it requires this, I won't say permanence, but this at least sheltering enough to translate far enough into the future and to enough people to have an impact. You have to try to imagine how much, if you imagine that your chain of transmission for a discovered essential truth about being is only the monks who occupy this specific cell in this specific monastery can pass it on to one another in an unbroken chain. Will that actually translate anything into the future? Will it have any impact on history? Will it have any? No, right? So there is the need for this sheltering is in the nature of the finiteness of the investigators, the fragility of the truths involved, and what's at stake in anything like this history as an ongoing project that is meant to be not just a project of a single individual, but a wider project than that. Josh, I can't tell if your hand is up for the previous or on this one. I'm going to assume it was from a previous if you don't type up. Or maybe you're just having audio difficulties. Okay. The future ones is a very short section, but he's describing this group that will be the future ones of the last God specifically. Okay, a couple of things which are clear here. First is there's this general peaks of philosophical or spiritual insight, having an effect on things. We'll talk about what the basis of that is seen to be in just a second. There's the fact that he seems to know that our own hour is an era of downgoing, again, and he talks about the essence of a people and the fact that goals for a people or a nation that are only about its mere requirements are insufficient to make a people historical. They are only historical by belonging to their God, finding their God, belonging to their God. And it is only their seekers who bring this about. So there's a sense in which the domain of what we would call the political only rises to the level of historical to the extent that it is involved in this this ongoing revelation, if you pardon the expression, right? Why does he have this faith in this power of the spiritual point, right? Okay, this is on 314, section 250, where he says the future ones stand in sovereign knowledge as genuine knowledge. This is the point. Whoever attains this knowledge cannot be subjected to calculation or compulsion. And he goes on to say it's useless, has no value, etc., so it can't be calculated on. The fundamental point here is that this is is and is meant to be a freeing knowledge such that those who have it cannot be subjected to calculation or compulsion. It is a sovereign point. The way to put this is that people who have this mission of being shepherds of being and place or sites in which the unveiling of being happened, this truth mission, if you want to put it that way, are listening to a source or a goal of their activity, or oriented on a goal of their activity that is sovereignly indifferent to the machinations of the world or of politics. It is a point of sovereignty as a point of freedom that is founded on something like philosophy or spiritual activity or truth dedication alone, something like that. Now, we need to know that there are people who are interested in such sovereign points for reasons other than Heidegger's, right? You tell somebody, I have a recipe for making people sovereign, independent, and unwilling to obey, right? And someone will find a political use for that, right? Even though it's meant to be an almost trans-political thing. But the claim here is that this knowledge and dedication frees from other worldly goals. It makes independent. It makes unmanipulable, so to speak. He also says that this results in authentic historical cognition. In other words, knowledge of what is actually happening, knowledge of what is actually going on, knowledge of the actual historical processes driving history. And those historical processes driving history, we've seen from this book, have nothing to do with, I don't know, the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, right? They have everything to do with this general disenchantment of the world, this change in the essence of truth, this exhaustion of the possibilities of the tradition of metaphysics, something like that. There are events on that scale that are the history that is actually being driven here. So not delineating current incidents and circumstances and cherished goals and aims. Instead, it's knowing the hours of the occurrence that first form history, our own hours, the era of downgoing. So the claim to anything like a importance or leadership for what happens of the people who are in this sect, if you want to put it that way, who have these thoughts, who have these goals, is their independence from the surrounding history and their ability to understand the deepest forces of the surrounding history, to know where they are and where things are going on the plane of the events that they care about on this philosophical and spiritual level, not on the level of political events or machinations. First, any questions about what that claim is, about how these future ones are distinct from the society around them? Yes, no? Okay. This is the structure of every Gnostic sect. There's a claim that enlightened few who have the secret knowledge, you know, can have through it the not only a key to history, but a key to the things that truly matter, whether it's history or not. So there's nothing in the structure that Heidegger is laying out there that is unique to him in that regard, right? It is you will find something similar in Nietzsche. You'll find something similar in some of the German idealists. But this and in various Gnostics of various kinds before then, all the way back to the Hellenic age, something like that. Who knows how much criticism there is in that? But the nature of what he's expecting from this group that is united by their belonging to this intimations about the possibility of the future God, right? That is what he's talking about, right? That is the social thing he's talking about. They are likely, it is likely that they are going to be very hard for anyone else to understand, right? You don't come to understand the rare by being very concerned with how communicable the things you are discovering is, right? There's no selection effect here to make sure the things they discover are popular with the greatest number, not what they're aiming at. It's only call or claim on the folks attracted to it is its depth and truthfulness, something like that. And to the extent it has those things. Anyone want to give me their own reactions to the future one section? Pete, do you have a thought on this?
Following along, but yeah, no particular thought.
Okay. I mean, I think it's not hard to say that as a matter of political or social or civilizational level analysis, it's naive to expect this to work. And if to work is taken in any operational sense, right? It may be a by its own lights noble sect, but it is likely to be a very small one with very limited influence. Let's put it that way. And it may be entirely reconciled to that. It has all of the accents in this section of a of writing an apocalypse that expects the civilization to go off the rails, but the few who are pure to see the light through the collapse, something like that.
And when he's talking of a people from the period that this is from and his earlier seminars and stuff, you get the sense that maybe he's talking about the German people.
Absolutely. He's criticizing what the regime is doing around him when he says, this is on page 316, the essence of people is grounded in the historicality of those who belong to themselves through their belonging to the God. Out of the event when this belonging historically on it first arises the reason, life, the lived body, procreation, lineage, or most basically the earth belonging to its history in their own way take its history back up in themselves, right? In other words, he's saying that it is for the sake of their God, which is that the prophets are, and it's for the sake of the prophets that the people are, and that's what makes the people an historical people. And when instead you have a concern with the, as he puts it, idolizing the mere conditions of its subsistence up earlier, this first paragraph, right? The danger of circling around itself and of idolizing as its unconditioned what are merely conditions of its subsistence. In other words, the earthly conditions of its being, without concern for its seekers or its truth or its God, right? So that is what he is diagnosing, not only in the Germany of his day, but in a lot of the modern world of his day, which is that they idolize the mere conditions of subsistence, right? Without a high goal, and he's contrasting that with a people that is oriented towards its God as its highest end, towards and revering of its holy men who, or its wise men who know for it, something like that. And it's a very put it this way, elitist conservative understanding of those things, right? It's an almost medieval understanding of those things. And the last God is already being mentioned here extensively, right? As that which the future ones are serving. And it's not even that they call, because he calls them the future ones the last God, are serving. Our serving is not quite the right word. It's more like our seeking, because it's not serving, it's seeking. Okay. Are there questions about the future ones before we get to the last God? Josh. Again, I can't tell if your hand is up the whole time. Okay, I'll put it down for you, and then if you put it up again, I'll know you mean it. Okay. All right, let's move on to the last God. So what is this last God business? First of all, why is it last? Why is it last God, not next God? Why is it last God, not highest God? Why is it last God, not first God? Why is it last God, not deepest God? Why last? Is it simply last? I'm going to go Socratic and quiz you on this.
Isn't last another word for last God, the ultimate God, Jason, the ultimate God?
Yes, it is ultimate, but he could have said highest. He says highest in other places. He doesn't say highest here. He also says it needs the longest antecedents. It is the most profound beginning rather than a cessation. The beginning which reaches out the furthest and catches up to itself with the greatest difficulty. So it's a last, but it's also a first. It's an origin. It's a first and a last. You've heard that before. And he says that people aren't going to understand this notion of extremity because they don't even understand their own death, if that's going to help them. So when he says, what is last? What is last is hard for people to grasp, is what he's trying to say here. And he's trying to say that what is last is not an ending, it's an origin. Why? Last is last as ultimate is something like a goal rather than an end in the sense of cessation. It is a mode of surpassing, he calls it. How else could it remain mode of surpassing? So any Platonist would have said highest. Heidegger won't say highest, right? Because he doesn't want to have that metaphysical direction of abstraction. But last has this futurity to it. It is a goal in a future-oriented direction to say last, right? If there were a succession of them, a last one would be the surpassing in that direction. But it's not that he's thinking of a whole succession of them, and it's not even, as he explains some length later, that he is thinking that there is going to be a one way or the other event in the near future of the A or the B, although he does call it the domain of the decision about the arising. Instead, the way he wants to put it positively is we are moving into the time space of the decision regarding the absconding and the advent of the gods. And there he says the gods, not of the last God. All right. Why this sentence? How does this sentence relate to the whole structure and the whole book? Those who have made the whole journey with us. Well, we started with this notion of this resonating as a nothing happening to being, as an event of nihilism, as a disenchanted world that you were trying to see if it's possible to re-enchant or something like that. So the world has become godless. This is you're in the Word of Nietzsche as a version of nihilism, and Heidegger is saying the reaction to that is going to be the time of the decision regarding absconding and advent. Nietzsche would say that time has passed. We already decided on absconding or murder, right? Not where Heidegger is. Why not? What is so different about Heidegger's evidence in the matter? Does Heidegger tell you where where there is the first, how to put it this way, the first occurrence of the passing by of the last God. This is on page 325. It's one of these typical Heideggerian constructors. You know the thing by its absence. Its felt absence. Right? The intimation is coming from the felt absence of the God. The nothing happening to being is being felt as absconding, and that absconding is going to elevate all the way into refusal. What does he mean by refusal, and who's doing the refusing? Dan or Pete?
Well,
Being is doing the refusing.
Sorry?
Being, I'm sorry, Pete.
Yes.
I was saying
be,
being is doing the refusing.
yes. But on the bottom of, which page is this? This is page 321, right? He says self-concealment, whose manifestus, italicized whose. He's calling being a who. If you're not paying attention. So yes, the refusal is being refuses to disclose itself to man. All right, now we need to understand something about the turning. The turning is this weird betweenness business of being needing Dasein and Dasein needing being, and you people who coming from the older traditions think of the mental pole or the subjective pole as being a purely interior opinion, fallible illusions of the mind, as opposed to the reality of nature or something like that. But Heideggerians don't think that way. Heideggerians think that the Dasein is a piece of being. It is a structurally related piece of being. It is being itself. It is not only rooted in being. Not only rooted in being, it is one of the ways in which being happens. Is the site where the appearing of being happens. So there is a beingness in Dasein, if I can put it this way. So this refusal, yes, is of being. Being is not appearing to Dasein. This is also part of Dasein not being dislodged into the full hyphenated Dasein. So he says at other places, the task is to dislodge human being into Dasein with a full hyphen. And when and as that has not happened, being is refusing to reveal itself to man. And that is being's refusal. But that being's refusal also implicates Dasein in it. Dasein is part of the being that is in that refusal.
So it's also that we've forgotten being, right? And that's why we need to go back to the other beginning, where
there is
physics.
There is definitely a forgotten in the other beginning, and the tradition of metaphysics can teach us to question about being again, although our question will change along the way to how does being essentially occur. But the underlying nothing happening to being is an inattentiveness of man, yes, but if we're only thought of as an inattentiveness of man, it would not yet rise to the level of the refusal. The refusal move here is precisely experiencing this lack of unveiling as bestowal withheld in active refusal, right? So the seeker after the truth of being experiences the recalcitrance of his problem not as something which makes him give up, but as something that makes him yearn for the cessation of the refusal, if that makes sense. There is an intimation in the diagnosis of refusal that the refusal could reverse. The refusal does not have to be. it is not a condition of nature that being does not speak to man. It is a present actuality. If being did reveal itself to man, it would have the character of event, not the character of always already true. It would not have the character of it must always be so or it can never be so. It would have the character of contingent historical happening. You see why we've been stressing the event character, uniqueness, and self the whole way? He's not saying being is always hidden from man. He's not saying being is always revealed to man. If he were saying any of those things, he'd be a Platonist. He's talking about something which has a history, which is contingent, which is unique, which happens one time once and could happen otherwise. It is
Yes,
treated
but
with
that
possibility.
event,
Go ahead.
the event can, I'm sorry, Jason, the event can only eventuate with Dasein. Without Dasein, no event.
Yes, but even with Dasein, not necessarily event.
Right, and that's because
That's because
go ahead.
that's because Dasein has not yet become Dasein. Once Dasein becomes Dasein and is appropriated and realizes the bestowal, yes, Dasein is eventuates the event. The event cannot exist, no, I don't want to say exist. The events cannot eventuate without Dasein. Only the Dasein that accepts the bestowal.
You got half of the causality he is laying out correct as he is saying it, but there's another piece. Nowhere does he says, as long as Dasein turns to the bestowal, seeks bestowal, hearkens to the call, it is certain and will eventuate. Doesn't say that at all. He's not claiming this is in Dasein's power.
Yes, but he does say that Dasein must dislodge into Dasein. He does say that, doesn't he?
Human being must dislodge into Dasein. And where the must there is, in order for this to be possible, but possible is not necessary. This is not a calculation. It is not constraining being to speak. It is inviting being to reverse a refusal.
The bestowal can never be calculation, never. Otherwise, it is not a bestowal.
Yes. So this is the point. The thing that is being implored for is the reversal of a refusal, because the thing that is being sought is a free gift. The thing that is being sought is not a calculable, extractable resource that can be mined from being by making the right move. I'm not saying Heidegger would ever say that. I'm just showing you how sharply this differentiates from something that someone else could say here, right? There is a and this is not to say that it's just an awaiting, right? It's not simply an awaiting, but there's an element of dutiful hopefulness for a sought boon that is not commandable, but can only be asked for, something like that. Okay, but the other thing I wanted to explain here was that this first intimation, the first intimation of the last God is precisely the last God not showing, right? Yeah, so I mean, there's an element of this which fit any emerging out of the plight, the stuff we already had in section 2. The first way in which the last God is intimated is absence. That's the critical point that I'm trying to make here. what what reason does Heidegger have for thinking that a last God could appear? One, that the time of the decision regarding the absconding or return of the gods in general is upon us, which is something like this felt resonating of the disenchanted world. But in addition, there is a felt lack, right? There is there's an experience of it. There's an intimation which he thinks or knows or feels would only be answered by a call that, if hearkened to, would result in a bestowal that is fruitful, something like that, and led to all of this spiritual freedom and spiritual sheltering of truth that he had described in the previous two sections. The felt lack of that happening is the first evidence of its possibility.
It's like the plight. Remember the plight?
Yes, but it's not simply the plight. It's not simply the plight of the absence. It is yet that is you're right, a felt lack. But there's also there's an intimation. There's an intimation of the possible bestowal, is what I'm trying to say. There's a projection on possibility here, is also what I'm trying to say, which we'll get to in the very last section. All right, so he's talking about the negative in being on 325. From this we can surmise the intimacy and pervasiveness of the negative in being. The truth of the not itself, consequently also nothingness. He's talking about various fallacies about it. It is possible to step into this realm, however, only through the preparation that consists in the long presentiment of the last God. In the future ones, the last God are prepared first and only by those who find traverse and build a way back out of the experienced abandonment by being. And you have to understand there, that's everything we talked about in part 2, and it's everything that was there in the Word of Nietzsche, God is Dead essay, and it's everything that Nietzsche has diagnosed as nihilism. That's what he was talking about, building the way back out of the experienced abandonment by being.
And so is the intimation realizing that we're caught up in machination, that we're realizing we are in the Gestalt, therefore there should be something else?
It's realizing that truth is evaporating, and that service to the truth being called for by the capacities of Dasein and the nature of man. The evaporating of truth is the most essential thing that is transpiring at the moment. And in that being felt as the thing which is transpiring at the moment, truth is evaporating, is contained as its negative, the possibility of service to truth as a vocation, something like that. Not just of a person, but of a civilization. The greatest nearness of the last God eventuates when the event, as he has itself abiding, is elevated into refusal. The latter is essentially other than sheer absence. It's not just that it isn't there. Refusal as belonging to the event can be experienced only on the basis or originary essence of being as lit up in the thinking constituted of the other beginning. Refusal makes Dasein something overcome, not as suppressed, but on the contrary, as snatched up in the grounding of its freedom. Okay. The extreme road to the last God is in the refusal is peculiar nearness. Saying this is not something that causes despair, it causes longing. Through the refusal, the Dasein is compelled to itself as the grounding of the sight of the first passing by of the God as the self-refusing God. Only on the basis of this moment can be fathomed how, as the domain of the event of that compelling, being must restore beings. In such mastery of beings, the honor of the God must be carried out. So the point is, the first passing by of the God, this is top of 327, is in the felt refusal. This is the first passing by of the God as the self-refusing God. in his like final interviews where he's talking about only a God can say this kind of stuff that, you know, shocked the interviewers. This is the same stuff he was hearkening back to, right? And by the way, he did not mean by that that you know, whether or not there's anything going to be saved going on is partly up to how we act, rather than that it's sure to happen. Okay, I wanted to get to that point about the first passing of the last God is felt as the God who refuses, and by the God who refuses means refuses to be unveiled. So the God that refuses to be unveiled is Heidegger's counterpart to the God that Nietzsche killed. And the last God is his antidote to the last man. We're not at the last man, we're at the last God. We're not at a God who is dead, but at a God who refuses to reveal himself to man. And the difference between one and the other may be very little for where you are now, but it's, from Heidegger's point of view, entirely different as to where you can be in the future. And that is what makes it the foundation of the possible other beginning. Okay. You could see in this nostalgia for the spiritual leadership of the spiritual understanders of truth that he thinks should, you know, lead and form a nation and all that kind of stuff. And you can trace that back to the romantic ideals of the Middle Ages in Holderlin and things like that. All of that is culturally true, so to speak. But he's playing on the register of Nietzsche's understanding of nihilism and its tropes and characters, and he's flipping bits of it in a way that do not violently disagree with the diagnosis of the present, but they completely disagree about the possible future that can eventuate from it. Dan?
Yeah, first, in Nietzsche, it's not like Nietzsche kill God. It's like we all kill him.
Yes.
Yeah, and here it's a handful of people who kind of are kind of bringing the last God back, like the whatever the few ones, and I think that's what you said is kind of, it struck me also, like here this kind of like, and you read this passage that says that this extreme remoteness of the last God in the refusal is a peculiar nearness. So it's kind of like to this kind of understanding a refusal as this absence as something is missing. It's something is there, but we cannot see it, or and
yeah, no, I mean this goes back to very early Heidegger. I was going to say, you know, this method of phenomenal evidence from a felt lack, right? That's, you know, he was doing that in Being and Time already, right? The thing that drives people crazy about Heidegger who come from other philosophical traditions is they see remarkably little evidence in that, right?
Sorry, Heidegger argument is we need to go back to Dasein. Like that's how we feel this. It's not something a proof or something in proposition or anything. It's objective. It's just going back to Dasein, and that's how we kind of, it's the only way to feel this absence as a nearness or a presence or whatever.
So mostly agree, but back to Dasein, right? What does it mean? It means that from Heidegger's point of view, we have to focus on the unique and actual, and he thinks that an enormous amount of what has led away from this has been the focus on, not even the focus on, has been the flight from the unique and actual, right, to the class and the general, right? When he's talking about getting back to Dasein, he means both to the kind of evidence from the unique and actual and to the concern for the unique and actual. There is an enormous part of what was excised from the world when it was disenchanted that was dropped simply because it wasn't common enough. It wasn't something which could be reliably communicated to anyone with a grade school education. Therefore, it was not real.
And this also goes back to the motto that he says, not the Christian God. That's the God kind of like that died in Nietzsche, but he's trying to revive one that is, as you said, is unique and is quite different. And he's, as you say, is the last God. Is not the supreme God or the absolute.
Yes, he does make a distinction between the last God and the Godhead, which is an interesting distinction. The Godhead is a term of art for the medieval scholastics and the medieval mystics in specific, the Quietist mystics in particular. But for that matter, all the way back to some of the Neoplatonists. But he also, I don't know if I can find the passage. There's a, where is it? Right, on 250, in 252. Where is this? This is back in the future ones. Right. In the playing out of this strife, the future ones, the last God, will reach the event through the strife, and in the broadest retrospect will recollect the greatest created thing as the fulfilled non-repeatability and uniqueness of being. I have a reading of that. I don't know if anyone else does, but there is a play in the final section on the gods, the last God, and the Godhead, which are used as three different terms of art. And we have Holderlin held out as kind of an example for us of what he is talking about here. You need to know first that the absconding of the gods is a traditional topic of late antiquity, right? The pagan gods have fled, they have absconded, leaving a denuded heaven. This was a traditional understanding, late pagan world. That absconding of the gods, and could they possibly return, is the kind of thing that Holderlin thought about. I mean, it's a romantic subject for Holderlin. And what were the gods of Holderlin? The fled gods of antiquity, the pagan ones, the pantheistic views of a Goethe, and the syncretic tendencies of German idealism that were going to put together Christianity and paganism and early Enlightenment, Hermeticism, or anything like that, right? So there was this, all of that amalgam is flying around in Holderlin, and he is not claiming to know which of them eventuates, but he's insistent upon the intimations of the things, right? The intimations of the divine behind things, the sense of more behind things. That's what's characteristic of the Holderlin that Heidegger is pointing to here continually, right? That felt sense of the absent more, and that felt sense of mystery, right? And that's also what he, in the whole section on the resonating, was saying feels off because it's absent, right? So that's, all of that is the realm of the gods and the decision regarding the gods, which in the last section precedes the discussion of the last God itself. The last God is the God of the refusal. The last God is the God that refuses to reveal, which I put it to you means he is the corresponding formation and the exact formation of the last man. Because the era of that refusal is the era of Nietzsche's Last Man. It's the exact same era. But the Godhead, page 322, still in the refusal section, said, to speak of the last God, is that not a degradation of God, indeed pure and simple blasphemy? Yet what if the last God must be so named, because the decision about the gods ultimately leads under and among them, and so raises to the highest the essence of the uniqueness of the Godhead. Peter's running out of juice, his battery at least. Yeah, the Godhead is not a matter of calculation towards the end of that. But distinguishing between God and the Godhead is something that you find in, who am I thinking of, the medieval mystic, Meister Eckhart. You find it also in the Neoplatonists. anyway, Godhead is something more like the philosopher's unitary original one, rather than the God of this or that Enlightenment tradition, not Enlightenment, Revelation tradition. I mean, so there is something that's held out there that the naming of the God in question as the last God is part of the fact that the path ahead leads through the decision of the gods, leads under and among them. Right, it's the place or site where decisions about the absconding or return of gods occurs, the Holderlin place, and also the place of the war between the last man and the last god, so to speak. Or by more, I mean spiritual struggle. Okay. My point is that I don't think that the last god thing is a positively meant piece of theology, right? It is a term of art describing an historical constellation that is happening in philosophy and in the civilization now, in the era of the downgoing, so to speak. But beyond that, there are philosophical questions that touch on theology that Heidegger has left unanswered. Right? He's pointed to them by mentioning terms like the Godhead, but he has not even attempted to address or answer them. My point is that the last God as a formation here is not even meant to be answers to those questions. He's not going to give you a metaphysics of the last God along the lines of Plotinus discussing the top of a Platonic hierarchy and what the one is and how it's related to the good and truth and that sort of thing. Nothing like that going on here at all. That's not what he means when he says the last God. The last God is the God of refusal.
Nor are we to look at this refusal of this last God as negative, as not as we're not going to know, not to see the not knowing as something that has to be overcome. We have got to overcome the idea of not knowing as something that is a challenge to us. No, we accept the not knowing.
There's definitely an acceptance to not knowing, but there's also a promise in it, right? The refusal has, to Heidegger, the hopeful note, there is something that can refuse, right? The refusal is a felt lack, but it's a felt lack that could be reversed, and it is a felt lack that is a how to put it. There is hope in the diagnosis of refusal.
Yes, but there is no path, no system, no categories, nothing of that. Nothing of what we're used to.
There's no system, certainly, but the back at the end of is the end of the section? Oh no, sorry. No, it's the end of this section. 330. When he's talking about what it says, how few know that the God awaits the grounding of the truth of being, and thus awaits the leap of the human being into Dasein! Exclamation point. It seems to say that the human being would and would have to await the God. Perhaps this is the most insidious form of the most profound godlessness. The point is, just waiting is not what's being called for. What is being called for by this possibility, for those few who know that it is possible, is the leap of the human being into Dasein. Okay. In addition to holding out the ultimate godlessness of waiting around and not doing anything, on 329, he also tells you what is blessed. I told you we have a full Gnostic sect here. At 329, this is the third paragraph down, the paragraph that starts, what compels. Blessed is whoever may belong to the wretchedness of its fissure in order to be a complying listener to the ever-inceptual dialogue of the solitary ones. In this dialogue, the last God intimates himself because through it he is intimated in his passing by. So blessedness is being a complying listener to the dialogue of the solitary ones about the last God. So blessed are those who read contributions to philosophy in a complying manner. I'm only slightly.
They would call that humility. Humility is listening attentively and compliantly.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I'm not meaning to mock him a little bit. I am just pointing out that the humility he is calling for here from his readers and it is the complying complacence of taking his word for it. But he is an investigator and a challenger at all times, and we emulate. We do not just we emulate him in his audacity, not just listen to his words and joining us to the humility that is conspicuously absent from himself. I'm exaggerating for clarity, right? But
That's
my point
kind of funny.
Yeah, my point is that he tells us what is the most profound godlessness in this new new, and he tells us what is blessedness in this new view, right? Previously, he had given us the entire what will happen to the civilization while this while these future ones are attempting to understand. Okay, as they reach through the strife, and few recognize them with no publicity. Okay, I think we've gotten a decent sense, a good sense of what the last God is, what the last God as a formula is, why it's last and not highest, that the formula for the last God is the God of the refusal, that the refusal is a felt additional accent on top of the not knowing. We've seen its artistic relation to this future ones of the enlightened move, and we've seen its contrast with Nietzsche and its echoes in Hölderlin. That's the stuff I wanted to get to on the last God. All right, so I wanted to quickly mention, we're going to have time for questions about what we've just gone over, but I want to quickly mention the next session we're planning on October the 27th, same time. So if those who don't know, the clocks will not change yet. That's another Sunday. The reading is section 8 on being, sections 256 to 266, sorry, 257, 266. That means up to the section on the ontological difference, including that section on the ontological difference. This is pages 333 to 369 in our edition. In terms of the subjects, there's a sketch of the whole prospect of the whole book. So we're zooming back out to the whole structure that he's been sketching. There's the discussion of philosophy of projection and the ontological difference. In the ontological difference section, it's partly going to be a downplaying of its importance compared to the importance it seemed to have at the end of being in time. He's going to explain what of that survives these revisions and what of it does not. The part that I'm leaving out for a final session is the part that immediately starts the next section on being, and it's just positively talking about being with a Y and how being with a Y is different from being with an I. So we're going to read up to the ontological difference section. The next one. All right, floor is open. Isabel.
Yes, I just wanted to say just a personal thing that in Italian, the last God is translated as I venturi, the ventural ones. And I have part of my family whose last name is Venturi, and which I always found extremely interesting. Also, I don't want to attribute to Heidegger a smug feeling, as I was meant to understand. We were speaking of him being the kind of an elite group, or there is a fact though that Heidegger did identify the lack of questioning of being, and first and only that few, if any, have actually pointed the world and I mean the philosophical Occidental world in that direction. He did that. And there's something else too about seeing yourself as elite if you want to join this group or be part of this group, which is a group that would one day want to dislodge from human to Dasein. In that my father, there are things such as proverbs, and the proverbs is the wisdom of the people, not the wisdom of philosophers. And my father used to say always, "De lo bueno poco, de lo bueno poco." If it's good, of the good, only a few. That's not somebody being smug. That is saying what is there. It's absolutely true. The great population, they want equality. they want everything to be reduced to the lowest denominator. That's how you get a lot. But it's not anybody being smug and saying, "Oh, I'm an elite," because I'm saying my father was not elite. He never, de lo bueno poco, he was just reciting a fact that it is true that something that is good just by its very nature cannot be. Perhaps it should be, but it somehow is not widespread. Thank you.
I agree with you that it's not widespread, and I agree with you that it's not simply a smugness. There is a claim of sovereign, genuine knowledge. How to put it? Many other philosophical traditions would view the expectations on this sect of the knowing ones here that he is talking about as being rather a lot to hang on, having more successfully fathomed a few of the structures of Dasein and a few of the a better insight into the structure of the life world, or a more original understanding of the origin of space and time in a way that includes the experiential pole or something like that. The point is, we have to recognize how extreme the claim is, or we're not even hearing it, right? There's an extreme claim here for the importance of this insight. The insight is obviously not easy if it takes, reading a book of this difficulty to get to even know what it is saying, especially given the amount of preparation needed to read a book of this difficulty with attention, etc. Right? So he has all of these words of praise for the future ones, the strangers alike in heart, and the ones who go down in the essential sense. Only those who belong can know the error of the downgoing. There's all of this, if I can put it this way, the typical promises to the knowers who are following in this trail. And you must recognize, not only is this something which is meant to be just a claim that's factual about the understanding, it is also a trope. It is a common piece of philosophical rhetoric to invite those into the circle of the knowers and have high expectations of them as of the saved and the blessed, right? So I'm pointing that out because it is a structure that Heidegger did not invent, but which he is inhabiting. Ella?
Yes, I agree. Jason, I definitely see this inclination in Plato's Republic, of the elite, the few, the knowers of the good, going into the light and, so forth. The tripartite soul, and the classes in his constructed imaginary republic. I think there is an elitist view, and only the few can know, the good and be the philosopher king. So I think this is sort of, you're right, he's beckoning to that image here. And yeah, I'm wondering too, if simple followers close to nature would have all of the layers to peel back to get to this Dasein, that people who are immersed in materialism and immersed in technology, and perhaps that the simple person may have more access, the person in nature, to Dasein, just because the nature of themselves is simple and more in accordance with nature, and the lack of layers of technological knowing that has been accumulated. So anyway, I will leave it there.
It's not a horrible thought. I mean, it's not even alien to some of the things that Heidegger says here. And I'm thinking of on page 317, he talks about some people who have this in a simplicity. So the actual line is, the few future ones count among their number those who are essentially inconspicuous, who receive no publicity, but who, in their inner beauty, gather together the pre-gleaming of the last God, and then bestow it on the few and the rare by mirroring it back. So there's a sense in which that can be simply felt. And I think Heidegger is thinking here of Hölderlin and the heroes of Hölderlin's story is more than he's thinking of. But I mean, it may be along the lines of what you're talking about, but he's thinking of that as something which is communicated to the few and the rare, that encourages them. They see the stuff that they're talking about in those who, inconspicuous without publicity, simply have the inner beauty to shine that sense back. So, and it's not that that's a great accomplishment on their part. It's more like something that they're naturally, it's part of their nature, put it something like that. So he does definitely, despite the spiritual effort elitism, so to speak, of a lot of the rest of it, he does leave that space, that room. And I think a lot of that, goes back to the Romantic tradition, the Hölderlin tradition he's inspired by, but which was much more of a, it had heroes in it in the common folk, if you get me, who were supposed to be more in touch with their spiritual nature or tradition, something like that. In Hölderlin, I'm thinking. So I mean, it's not an alien thought to Heidegger, is what I'm trying to tell you. But I do think that this basic, I can put it this way, Gnostic knowers move is not just there in Plato, where it's much more explicitly political, as wisdom is a title to rule, but it's also there in the likes of Nietzsche, and it's there in lots of other religious as opposed to philosophical thinkers in between. It's just, he didn't, as I said, he didn't invent this structure, he's inhabiting it. Okay, useful comments all. So further questions on what we just read? Any questions about what the next reading is or the next time? All right, if not, then I will thank you all for attending and for the great questions. I hope this is all useful to you. I'll stop the recording and put this up on YouTube sometime later tonight. It usually takes a few hours to do the upload and such. So sometime before midnight tonight, it should be up on YouTube. All right, thanks everyone.